And to get a running start, I'm going to back up a little bit here to Luke chapter 8. Jesus has just finished his Sermon on the Mount, and he sends, he's with his disciples, this is in verse 22, with a ship, and he says, let's go over to the other side of the lake. And so they launch out the boat. And as they go out there, and the boat is rocking gently in the waters of Galilee. Rock, rock, rock. Little boat on the sparkling sea. He falls asleep. Imagine that, Jesus sleeping. Hardly gets time to sleep. He spends a lot of hours during the day taking care of people and their needs. He spends many more hours up on the mountain at night praying to his Father. But here Jesus is sleeping, and a storm comes down, verse 23, and wind. We had some wind and a storm Thursday afternoon, didn't we? Just as we got there around the cemetery and burial site, and people got seated. There's some seats there under the tent. Other people were standing around the outsides of the tent, and when the rain fell and it let loose, we were all in the tent as best we could. Poor Harley, he got drenched. He's holding the umbrellas, but it didn't do much good. There was a storm and wind. And the disciples, it says, they're in danger. They're in jeopardy. And they came and they woke up Jesus. Now, they've been trying by themselves, I imagine, doing everything they could. They're experienced seamen, sailors, they're fishermen. They've been out in that lake. It's a big lake. You get out in the middle of it, you can't see the shore. Master, we perish. In another place it says, don't you care that we perish? And he awakes, he stands up, he rebukes the wind and the raging water, and it ceases. There is a calm. And he says, where's your faith? And they get to the other side of the lake. In other accounts it says immediately they're at the other side. And they arrive in the country of the Gadarenes. And they get out of the boat. Here it says a certain man. In other accounts it says two men. Maybe one of them was so maniacal and out of his mind, he was beside himself. Anyway, he comes rushing down there. His devils had a long time possessed him. He didn't have any clothes on. And he didn't live in any house. He dwelt out there in the tombs, it says. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him. I imagine that would be at his feet. And with a loud voice he said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech you, torment me not. Who's speaking here? The demon, that's right. And the next verse says, for he commanded the unclean spirit to come out. Evidently, he had already done the commanding, and this demon is responding, saying, how can you do that? Don't torment me. For oftentimes this demon had caught him. He was asleep, He was kept bound with chains and fetters, but he had broken them and driven by the devil into the wilderness. This guy, society they had to contain him somehow. He was just tearing everything up. But he broke chains and broke loose, and he's on the loose now. And Jesus said to him, "What is your name?" Now he's speaking to the demons here. And the answer comes back, "Legion," because many devils had entered into him, and they besought him that he would not command them to go into the deep, into the abyss, the bottomless pit. Same words used in Revelation when it talks about the bottomless pit. But there was this herd of swine, these pigs, unclean, and the devils sought Jesus, asked him permission that they could go into the pigs, and he gave them permission, and the devils went out, entered the pigs, and they went on a mad frenzy. They became mad. And just like this man, they broke loose and from those who were hurting them and catapulted over the edge of a cliff down into the ocean and drowned. So they said, "Don't send us into the deep," and they went into the deep anyway, into the water. And the people, the herders, rushed back to the city to tell everybody what had happened. And the people of the town came out and they said, "Oh, we don't want the likes of you around here. You're nothing but trouble. Go away." But when they got there, verse 35, they find the man of whom the devils were departed sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed. Now, where did he get his clothes? Somebody donated a robe, a cloak, a shawl, whatever they were. Somebody had some extra. They covered him up. And in his right mind, and they were afraid. Now they're afraid. There's this man. What happened to who knows? Just like the disciples out on the sea, when they calmed the storm, then they were exceedingly frightful. Who is this that has power over the winds and the waves? And the people said the same thing. So Jesus calmed the wave, the storm, and he calmed the storm in this man, this demon-possessed man. He calmed him as well. And he's sitting at the feet of Jesus. Now, okay, that's the prelude to our story today. We're going to go over a couple chapters here to chapter 10. Down near the end of this chapter in verse 38. Now, Jesus has just finished telling this parable about I don't think it was a parable, it's a true story. A man who went down to Jericho, and he's beat up by the robbers, left half dead. And Obert gave us this sermon recently. And Jesus tells about who of all people had compassion on him, but a Samaritan. Bound up his wounds, carried him down to the inn, paid for all of his expenses. That's the neighbor. That's the neighbor. That's amore. Now it came to pass, as they went, this is talking about Jesus and the disciples, he entered into a certain village. And a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. What village is this? Bethany, that's right. She had a sister named Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving. Who's she serving? Jesus and all the disciples. She's got 13 people to feed here. And she's busy rattling around the pots and pans in the kitchen. And she looks around, and where's her number one helper? Mary, her younger sister. Gone. She's not there. Wait, hey, wait a minute. Where is she? But Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. And Martha comes out and says, Lord, don't you care that I perish? In the kitchen, slaving all by myself in there. My sister has left me. I'm all alone. Bid her, therefore, that she help me. Command her. Like you commanded the waves, like you commanded the spirits out of that demon. Command her. Help. What did Jesus say? Martha, Martha. Abraham, Abraham. Simon, Simon. Saul, Saul. Peter, Peter. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. You are careful and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful. What's that one thing? What's the one thing? Martha had overlooked the one needful thing. She was distracted. She had gotten off base. She's off course. She's not where the one needful thing is. Who has found the one needful thing? And Mary has chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. And where did Mary find that good part?
At Jesus' feet.
At the feet of Jesus. That's right. Well, that's our story. This is quite a story. This is one little part of the story. It tells us that there are two sisters, Mary and Martha. They know Jesus. Somehow they've connected. And they're on two different courses. They're kind of going in two different directions. Jesus wants to get them back on course, as well as all of his disciples, one in particular that he knows is not in spirit with what his plan is as the Messiah, as the sent of God. Read here from the second volume, Spirit of Prophecy. This is the precursor to what would later become this portion of it, The Desire of Ages. It's written about 20 years earlier, page 358. Mary was charmed by the words of Jesus to his disciples. You see, Jesus was still speaking to the disciples when they got inside the house there, Mary and Martha. Who else is in that house? Lazarus, their brother. We're going to learn that in another part of the story here. We can go to. You got to put all four Gospels together because this story is in all four Gospels, and we take the pieces of all four of them, put them together, and we get the whole picture. Mary was charmed by the words of Jesus to his disciples. And seeing a golden opportunity to become better acquainted with the doctrines of Christ, the teachings of Jesus, she quietly entered the room where he was sitting, and taking her place at the feet of Jesus, drank in eagerly every word that fell from his lips. In The Desire of Ages, the book that finally emerged from this 20 years later, some additional information given. This is on page 524. The one thing that Martha needed was a calm, devotional spirit, a deeper anxiety for knowledge concerning the future, immortal life, not just the demands and burden and the cares of this current life, the graces necessary for spiritual advancement. She needed less anxiety for the things which pass away, what we have to deal with every day, and more for those things which endure forever. Jesus would teach his children to seize every opportunity of gaining that knowledge which will make them wise unto salvation. The cause of Christ needs careful, energetic workers. There is a wild field for the Marthas with their zeal in active religious work. But let them first sit with Mary at the feet of Jesus. Let diligence, promptness, and energy be sanctified by the grace of Christ then the life will be an unconquerable power for good. So, do we need Marthas? Yes. They are the driving dynamo that keeps things going. And we need that energy. It just needs to be directed in for the right purposes. And have priorities. What's really important? Mary responded to the invitation of Jesus, "Come unto me and learn of me." Matthew 11:28. So we have two different sisters, and let's put the story together. If we go to the first gospel where it's mentioned, it's in Matthew 26. And there is a plot. If you look at the very first verses there of Matthew 26, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people assembled together in a palace of the high priest, which was Caiaphas that year, and they consulted how they're going to kill Jesus. Not on the feast day. What feast day is coming up? Passover. Not on the feast day, or there will be an uproar among the people. So when did they do it? On the feast day. Okay, verse 6. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany, this tells us what the town was, where Mary and Martha was, in the house of Simon the leper. Oh, here's another character. Simon. He's got leprosy. Does he have leprosy now?
No.
Why?
Jesus healed him.
How do you know that? Does it say anywhere that Jesus healed him? It doesn't say that. That part's not there. But we can conclude, we can deduct that Simon is no longer leprous. Something has happened. Somehow Simon has gotten healed of his leprosy, but he's known as Simon the leper, and Jesus is in his house.
So he can't be a leprous anymore.
There came unto him a woman having an alabaster box. Oh, now there's a woman in the house. Oh, this is getting complicated. Lepers don't live in houses where other people live. That's one of the things that you have to leave the city. You have to go outside the city and live with all the other lepers in a leper colony someplace. And you can beg for food and people will throw it to you from a distance, but you can't come in contact with them. And you have to warn them. If they start coming nearby, you cry out, "Unclean! Unclean!" But Simon's not a leper anymore. He's there, Jesus is there, and a woman comes in with an alabaster box of very precious ointment. Expensive. Poured it on his head as he sat eating there. Oh, they're having a meal. But when his disciples saw it, oh, the disciples are there too. Okay, this is quite a gathering. We've got Jesus and the disciples, and they're in the house of Simon, who once was a leper. And when the disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, "To what purpose is this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for much and given to the poor." Now, if you go down to verse 15, you see how much Jesus was sold for. It's immediately after this. So something happened. This event sparked something. And a result of this encounter here, this woman wasting, as in their opinion, this costly ointment on Jesus. One of the 12, verse 14, Judas, he goes to the chief priests and he covenants with them. He bargains. He contracts with them. A contract is put out on Jesus. You ever heard about that?
Out on his head.
Yeah, a hitman. Judas is going to become a hitman. And what will you give me if I deliver him unto you? How much is he worth? How much will you pay me? How much was it? 30 pieces of silver. 1/10, maybe. Oh my, less than that. Of what Mary's expended on Jesus. Hers cost almost a year's wages. This is 30 pieces of silver. It says about $52.80. Well, that was back in 1980, whenever this thing was printed. And another place we're going to find out where how much the other one was. So let's see here. Mark 14. We'll get some more information. And Mark 14 starts right out here. Verse 3. Being in Bethany, house of Simon the leper. Well, that's about the same. And he's there to eat. They're having a meal. Comes a woman with an alabaster box. And it's spikenard. Oh, now we know what kind of costly ointment this was. Spikenard. Very precious. She broke the box. Why did you have to break it? It's sealed. The ointment only can be accessed by breaking the box. And poured it on his head. And it's a one-time use. That's right. And there were some that had indignation. Same thing again. Why this waste? And here it says, this might have been sold for more than 300 pence and given to the poor. Now we learn from other places where Jesus gives the parable about the vineyard. The man, he goes to the marketplace and he says, I'll give you a pence for a day's work. So if a pence is one day's work, then 300 pence, it's almost a year's salary, right? Weekends, it's a good year's wages. And then, I'm not going to go into all the detail here. We're going to start back and get a little bit, just the essence of the story. Let's go to Luke 7. Luke 7. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. Pharisee. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat, and behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. Same story. Two things we learn from this account. Simon the leper is also Simon the Pharisee. Which came first, the Pharisee or the leper?
The Pharisee.
I think he was a Pharisee first. That's where he started out his career, and then he got leprosy somehow. What else do we learn here? This woman. And elsewhere, it just says a woman. This one says in the city. So it's a woman from Bethany. This is a Bethanite. And she's a sinner. So we've got Simon the leper and this woman the sinner. Who's the woman? Let's go to John chapter 12. John chapter 12. Boy, this starts right out. Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus, which had been dead, lived, and whom he had raised from the dead. Well, that's the chapter just before. Chapter 11 is the raising of Lazarus. So he's just raised him, and now he's there in Bethany. He had come to Bethany 6 days before the Passover. He raises Lazarus, and now there was made him a supper there in Bethany, and Martha served. Okay, we got Martha, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table. Then took Mary, who's the woman of the city, the sinner? Mary, a pound of ointment of spikenard, a whole pound of it. You heard about French perfumes, imported French perfumes. They used to have a notoriety. They were famous for being costly. And how would you buy French perfume? By the pound?
By the ounce.
By the ounce. An ounce. And how would you apply it? You dab it on, just dab it on. And you want that to last a long time because that was very expensive. Well, this is a pound of spikenard. Okay, that's a lot of it. Very costly, it says. And anointed the feet. How much is a year's wages? Average. Yeah, let's translate this so we can appreciate what this cost. $30,000 at least. Somewhere $30,000, $40,000. Okay, if you want $25,000, even if it was $25,000, would you want to? Oh well, that's a lot of money, even today. And then said one of the disciples, she wipes his feet. She anoints the feet of Jesus here. And the other one said his head. Now she's doing his feet and wiping it with her hair. And one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son. Oh my, what a story this is going to be. It's got intrigue, suspense, injustice, redemption, all the ingredients for a magnificent drama. And the story begins in Bethany. Now, we've already gone through some of this, but let me go back and give you a little more detail. Bethany is really close to Jerusalem. It's only about a mile and a half, at the foot of the Mount of Olives. So you go across the valley, going up the side of Mount of Olives on the southeastern slope, and that's where Bethany was. There's been a lot of controversy over what the name meant, Bethany. Well, Beth means what? House. Bethel, the house of God. Bethlehem, house of bread. Bethany, the house of Ananias, we don't know. Some question about what that Hebrew word might be, and several suggestions are that it could be house of dates, house of figs, house of the poor. That's a likely one. Who did Jesus often associate with? The poor. And Mary, Martha, and Lazarus was one of his favorite places to stay. We have in this same city Simon the Pharisee, who became Simon the leper, and his son Judas, Simon's son. Now, Martha, we've already identified her. She's type A personality, aggressive, hardworking young woman. She's a career woman, and she's got a mission. She's on a mission, and she's majored in home economics. Her reputation as a first-class caterer made her a favorite for all the social gatherings, parties, and potlucks. Mary, her younger sister, is lively, fun-loving, life of the party, real people person. And she's where the action is. That's where Mary's got to be, where everyone is. And Lazarus, the older brother, he's the responsible breadwinner for the group. Keeps the three siblings supporting them. Simon, the town's Pharisee, he attends the local synagogue and enjoys the company of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and apparently got to know Mary quite well. Now, we don't know how or to what degree. We're not told that. We do know later on. In fact, let's see, which one was it? Was it back in Luke, I think? Yeah. Back in Luke chapter 7. That Simon later says to himself, when Mary comes in to anoint his head and his feet.
39.
If this man were a prophet, he would know Mary like I know Mary. And how did Simon know Mary? Carnally, yeah. He knew that she was a sinner. He wouldn't allow her to touch him. So Simon knows something about Mary. We don't know whether this is from personal experience or how involved he might have been in Mary being a great sinner in the city, it says. But Mary apparently fell into sin just as Simon fell into leprosy. And the two we don't know the timing here, but they both preceded this incident. And things changed at the time of this incident for both of them. So Simon and Mary have a parallel course to some degree. There may have been some connection in that. Mary was possessed and Simon became a leper, and now, leprosy for a Pharisee, that is a big problem. Why? Because what do Pharisees believe about sickness?
Sin.
It's a curse. Leprosy was the curse. It was the finger of God. It was the curse. And you must be a great sinner. Sort of like Mary. She was a great sinner, right? And so here we got a Pharisee that's got leprosy. Ooh, what does that do for a Pharisee's reputation? Not a pretty picture. The leaven of the Pharisees taught that man born blind in John chapter 9 was either the result of the parents' sin or the man himself. But he was born blind. Did he sin in his mother's womb? No. And Jesus said, no, it wasn't that. That's not the cause. That's not how God works. He doesn't punish people because of their sins. Sin has its own punishment. But Jesus said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the teaching of the Pharisees, because they thought this way. So Simon, he's struck with leprosy. He's banished from his home. He's condemned to go outside the city, cry, unclean, unclean. Meanwhile, Mary, shamed by being led into immorality and all the whispers around Bethany. Oh, have you heard about Mary? Oh, isn't that a shame? Good girl. She was a good girl. Mary decides she's not going to stay there, and she's going to get away from all the heat. She packs up her little things, and she goes north up to the shores of Galilee, a little village up there called Magdala. There she supports herself by applying what she learned back in Bethany, and she earns a great deal of money. People pay well. But one day she heard about a teacher in Galilee. This is before she ever met Jesus. We're going back. And it's told that he had healed the sick. He had given sight to the blind, made the lame walk, opened the ears of the deaf. And she followed the crowds to where Jesus was and found herself sitting with many others at the feet of Jesus. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Pray to your Father in heaven, who hears in secret. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine. Fear not, for your Father in heaven numbers even the hairs of your head. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. Mary found herself weeping at the feet of Jesus, and she pours out her heart to him, confesses her sins, and she heard unbelievable words come from his lips. Go in peace, daughter. Your sins are forgiven. Mary, for the first time in a very long time, felt joy in her heart. She had drunk from the wells of salvation. Her life was changed. For a while. But Jesus left town. He traveled on, other people to minister to. Mary's left alone. The demons, however, were still there. And soon Mary is possessed again and she falls. But another day comes when she hears Jesus is coming nearby. She rushes out to him. She falls down at his feet. And again, Jesus prays with strong prayers on her behalf to his Father in heaven. The evil spirits are driven out of her life. This happens again and again and again. 7 times Mary is delivered from her life of sin until one day Mary learned how to sit at the feet of Jesus even when Jesus is not in town. She discovered what it meant to experience the personal presence of Jesus for herself. Have you discovered that? Have you realized that you can speak to Jesus even when you can't see him? Our own personal mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. This is how we worship the Father in spirit and truth, for Jesus is the truth. He's the Spirit of truth. So Mary is finally free. She learns how to be with Jesus all the time. And she knows it. She cashes in her life savings to procure a small 1-pound parcel of exquisite, imported Himalayan spikenard, harvested from the small white flowers that only grow in the Tibetan highlands. It takes many of these little flowers, crushed to release the fragrance and the oil. A pound of it, her life savings. And she returns home to Bethany to share the good news with her brothers, her sister. What a reunion that was. Together again, and what a story she had to tell. And then the day comes when Martha receives Jesus into her home. She had heard all about Jesus. She heard that Jesus was coming. She's out at the marketplace getting all the food for her next banquet that she's preparing. And she invites Jesus home. Now they all meet the great teacher, and they too fall in love with the Son of God. Soon their humble home becomes his favorite rest stop when he's in the neighborhood around Jerusalem, down in Judea. And every time he comes, Mary is at the feet of Jesus, listening, learning, soaking up his gracious words, her deliverer. But the happiness fades one day. Lazarus gets sick. He's really sick, and it doesn't look good. And Jesus is not in Bethany. He's up north. He's up in Galilee again. And Mary and Martha send an urgent message. Lord, behold, him whom you love is sick. John 11, verse 3. And when Jesus gets the message, he sends word back. this sickness is not unto death. Oh, they take the message into Lazarus. The master says, this sickness is not unto death. Lazarus says, oh, good. Good, I'm glad to hear that. 'Cause I sure feel bad. That's good news. And he gets sicker. His temperature goes higher. And he's delirious. Meanwhile, up in Galilee, Jesus doesn't do anything. He just stays there for 2 more days. Then Jesus announces to his disciples, let's go to Judea again. We're going to go down south. What? The Jews tried to stone you the last time we were down there. They've got a bounty on your head. What are you thinking of? And then Jesus says, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I'm going to awaken him. Well, the disciples say, if he's sleeping, the fever must have broke. He'll be okay now. Finally, Jesus reluctantly, he doesn't want to even say it, with much pain, he says, Lazarus is dead. He didn't want to use the word. Sleep? Yes. Death? No. Then Jesus arrives at the home of Jairus. You remember that story. Crowds keeping him from going, and Jairus is biting his nails. His daughter is about to die. And then word comes, trouble the master no more. Your daughter is dead. And Jesus says, fear not, only believe. He gets to their home, and what is he greeted with? All these wailers, professional mourners, they're whooping it up and making a terrible racket. And Jesus tells them to hush. For the maiden is not dead, she is just asleep. And what do? They laugh at him. So Jesus returns to Bethany, and he nears the city gates, and he hears this mournful cry, unclean, unclean. Oh, Jesus can't pass that by. He marches right up to this leper and heals him on the spot. He's now an ex-leper and a previous Pharisee. And now what does a Pharisee do? It's even worse than it was before. First of all, he gets leprosy. How do you explain that? And now, he's been healed of his leprosy, and he didn't do anything to deserve it. He didn't work for it. He didn't go and dip 7 times in the Jordan River. He didn't take a sacrifice to the priests. He didn't go on some pilgrimage. He didn't do anything to deserve this. And that's Pharisees. They can't live that way. They have to earn their good works, right? I mean, with good works, they have to earn their goodies. So he's restored. He gets to go back home, and he lays awake at night trying to think about what in the world am I going to do to earn my healing. Jesus is on his way to a funeral. Well, it's a little late now. It's been 4 days since Lazarus has died. And Martha hears him coming. She rushes out and meets him, and she says, almost blaming him, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. You know, it's all your fault. You should have been here. Why'd you take so long to come down? We sent word to you. And then she quickly adds, but I know that whatever God you ask God, he will give it you. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. Martha agrees. Oh, I know, he will rise again in the resurrection. Martha confesses. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Do you believe this, Martha? And she makes the second most powerful confession in all the New Testament. Like Peter, she says, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. Well, Mary hears the commotion. She is now out there and falls down at Jesus' feet. That's what it says here. And she repeats the same thing. Lord, if only he'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And that is when Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. Take me to where he lies, he says. They take him to the tomb. Roll away the stone. No, no, you can't do that, Martha says. Do it anyway, Jesus says. They roll the stone away, and then Jesus prays to his Father. A simple prayer. I know, Father, that you always hear me. But that those listening here may believe that you sent me. Answer this prayer. And then he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus is raised from the dead after 4 days in the tomb. Well, Simon has come up with his plan. I'm going to throw a feast for Jesus. I'm going to pay him back post-healing what I wanted to really do pre-healing so that he could do the healing, you know. He wanted to earn his healing like a good, respectable Pharisee. So he's got a list of attendees. He's got the invitation list. Lazarus, got to have Lazarus. He's just been raised from the dead. That'll be a draw. A big crowd will want to come to see Lazarus. And, of course, Jesus will be there. And, if you're going to cater for anything around it, you got to have Martha. So Martha's going to provide the food. But Mary's not on the invitation list. Wonder why. She's at home, but she hears that Jesus has been saying for some time that he's going to Jerusalem, that the Son of Man may be lifted up. She knew what that meant. She connected the dots. Went over the head of the disciples, I think, for the most part, but Mary understood that Jesus was that lamb in Isaiah 53 that was going to his slaughter. Jesus is the gift of God, the sent. He's the one who's going to bear the iniquities of many. And she determines that she is going to not wait post-death for his honor. She's going to honor him pre-death. She's going to do what Simon couldn't do. And she forms this plan quickly in her mind. She grabs the alabaster box. She goes out in the night to Simon's place. She sneaks in. She looks the situation over. The lights, they got little oil lamps going everywhere. Try to give a little bit of light in the place. They're sitting around the food in the middle of the room. They're laying down, reclined. Their feet are out. She's going to anoint Jesus' feet. There's something about the feet of Jesus. But there's something she didn't plan on. And when she broke the alabaster box, the room is filled with the odor of spikenard. All eyes are suddenly on Mary. She's nervous now. She's weeping at the feet of Jesus. And tears are falling on his feet. And that's another thing she forgot, a towel. Ointment is on his feet. She reaches it. She's anointing his head. She's trying to do it quickly. She uses her hair to wipe the ointment. And two people are thinking and looking this over. Simon looks on in horror. Judas, his son, gazes at the spectacle in disgust. Simon is horrified that Mary is there. Judas is disgusted that Jesus would allow this, that this was wasted. This was money wasted. And this is when Simon says, if this man was really a prophet, he wouldn't let this woman touch her because she's a great sinner. Judas thinks, what a waste of money. She blows $25,000, $30,000 on a foot bath. Jesus turns to Simon and he says, Simon, I have something to say to you. Uh-oh. He's heard about this man who can read other people's thoughts. And he says, say on, Master. And Jesus tells a simple story. There was a certain creditor who had two debtors. One owed $500, and the other owed but $50. And when neither one of them could pay him back, he frankly forgave them both. Now tell me, Simon, which one do you suppose loved him the most? Simon says, well, I suppose the one to whom he forgave the most. Jesus says, you're right. Bingo! Correct answer. You've judged rightly. Then turning to Mary, he said, Simon, you see this woman? I entered your house and you provided no water for my feet. Oops. But she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss of greeting, but she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my head and my feet. I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he to whom little is forgiven, he loves little. How kind of Jesus to not expose Simon in front of all his guests. He just told a simple story that only Simon would understand. But boy, did he get the point. And in the end, Jesus reached not only Mary, but he got Simon too. But he didn't get Simon's son. Judas is still just disgusted that this money, which could have been in the group's treasure bag, the money bag, which he carried, is now spilled all over Jesus and the floor. And he complains. But, as John points out, this he said not because he complained, cared for the poor, but he was a thief. And Jesus rebukes Simon's son, Judas, and he says, leave her alone. Why are you troubling her? She has done a good work for me. She has kept this for the day of my burial. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. Mark my words, wherever this gospel is preached in all the world, what this woman has done will be told for a memorial of her. And it has been. Mary had chosen the better thing, the one needful thing, sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to the words of Jesus, soaking up the precious words of Jesus. That's our one needful thing too, isn't it? I am thankful that Morris Vinden gave this sermon years ago. It's been an inspiration to me. Never cease to marvel. It was what gave me the motivation to put together not only this story from the four Gospels, but to see what else is there if we put all the Gospels together. Is there some other things that we could learn that we miss when we just read them in isolation? And worked on that project, did the blended Gospels. Mary chose the one needful thing, and that's what we need as well. Let's bow before the feet of Jesus as we listen to his words. Thank you, Jesus, for this beautiful lesson in how to treat people, how to reach hearts, how to be kind and gracious, tactful, patient. There are many hurting hearts. That ointment that was used by Mary to honor you is an ointment reflecting your life, your character. It's precious. It's costly. For your Father gave all heaven in pouring out that one unspeakable gift. Teach us how to use that ointment, your life, your character. Teach us to speak your words. We pray this in your name, through you, to your Father.